Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Paris Air Show at the historic Le Bourget Airfield outside the French capital. Our coverage here is sponsored by L3 Technologies and Leonardo DRS, and we're honored to have with us a former chief of the French Air Force and also a former commander, Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, General Jean-Paul Paloméros of the French Air Force. Sir, thanks so much for joining us.
Welcome in Le Bourget again.
Exactly. It's a long-running tradition for us to have some time, and I'm glad we're having this opportunity. When you retired a year and a half ago, you made it very clear that you weren't just going to be sitting around in the south of France putting your feet up. You were one of the military advisors to then candidate Emmanuel Macron, now President Macron, a young, dynamic leader. His party got tremendous gains in Parliament and the National Assembly to actually be able to do something. What I wanted to ask you is, what direction is this new president going to take French defense? And what was the advice that your team and those advisors together, you were one of many, were giving him about the direction of French defense under his presidency?
I think first and foremost, President Macron takes his responsibility as chief of the army as a great responsibility. He's shown that. He's been instantly to Mali and visiting the wounded soldiers in Percy Hospital, etc. So he's very motivated and really it feels like it is such a great responsibility. Secondly, when we build a program, the first idea was really to look forward. We need a new strategic direction, a new strategic review in a certain way, just to make sure that we make the good choice now for the future. And in the same time, we have to take care of current operations. The president was very clear that he will keep the pressure, he will keep the French engagement against terrorism abroad and within in our country. So a clear commitment. Terrorism is the first and major threat, but we will as well develop a full strategy for the future. Now what we expect is the launching of a strategic defense review, short, sharp, and then a new programming law for the next 5 years. So we can make sure that we have the resources agreed in accordance with the level of ambition. And I think we will see a switch in the way we work, perhaps more sincerity in the development of the budget according to the needs. But this is a huge task because, as you know, the former team, the former president, Mr. Hollande, has decided really to reinvest in defense in 2015 and then in 2016. Now we have to pay for that. And that's clear, that's good, but there is a price to pay. I mean, for reinvesting and a kind of modernization as well of the defense. I think the president has understood that. Now we are just at the time where the great decision will have to be made this summer for the 2018 budget and this long-term vision. So I'm confident, but vigilant as well.
Well, there is a criticism by some that they say that he is a guy from Bercy. He is a money guy, and also if you look at it from the EU under the Maastricht criteria, each country is limited on the amount of debt they can take on, and France is nearing some of those limits now. It's not like the United States that can add up enormous amounts of debt by robustly funding things and then having to create a deficit. Is there a concern, or is it reality that the French military may have less money and may have to make some big strategic trade-offs?
I think at the end of the day, it's a very good news that our president has had this experience in Bercy. He knows very well the Ministry of Finance. I would say he knows the tricks, but now he's in charge of the army, so he will be able to make the best decision according to what is the global economy, if I may say so. So perhaps we will see a change in the way how we operate, not seeing the ministers fighting each other, but more in a team. This is my hope, that we can work. I prefer to get, I would say, 90% for sure of one budget than 150% and then getting 70%, if you see what I mean.
Right.
And we cannot play this trick again. We must be very professional now. And I think the president coming from Versailles, at the end of the day, it's a good news for us.
And your expectation is not cuts, rather a continuation of the strategic plan.
I would say a constant and very step-by-step approach towards the 2%. That was very clear in the program. The 2% should be reached by 2025. Some of the candidates say it should be earlier. That was not possible. I mean, we must be clear. I prefer that this president has really committed himself to this goal because he knows that it will take time. But the most important is what we do with the 2%, the quality, how we work together. And one point which is extremely important is the commitment to Europe defense. So he is really opening the way for a new a surge in certain way in the European defense and how we work together. And there is a great hope now, and I hope that this strategic defense review will be open to our partners to make sure that we can identify all the converging points and we can capitalize on that to build for the future capabilities, multinational projects, and but with a clear strategy, I would say.
And I want to get to that because many countries in Europe are spending more money. President Trump was pressing nations on that. But before we get there, I want to get to capabilities first. France is a global power. Macron has been very tough on Russia. He was the world leader that actually challenged Putin when Putin visited the Elysee, and also has said that terrorism is a priority, but so is French engagement globally in parts of Africa and elsewhere where France has had long-standing relationships and forward-deployed capabilities, which I think Americans don't fully understand sometimes, whether it's in the farthest reaches of Asia or elsewhere. What I want to ask you is, as you look at the important strategic capabilities for the future, what are they for France? If you're looking at whether it's on investment, whether it's on personnel, what do you think are the most important things to be spending money on?
Well, I would say first and foremost, and it is not the first time we discuss that together, it's about coherency, the global coherency of the forces. I mean, you know, this theory of the weakest link. Now we are there where really we have to balance our short-term commitment, short-term investment in the people, training, education, maintenance, and the president understood that very well. He has met the people. He spent hours here in Le Bourget just to meet the people. So he knows that there is a kind of urgency to do that, and in the same time looking in the deep future. So we have really to balance that. The good news is that we have a brand new set of nice equipment, the latest version of the Rafale, the A4M, who made such a demonstration here, and now it's fully operational. We have, I spoke with the Air Force, they have 5 of them operational everywhere in the world today as we speak. So it's coming. The drones are doing well, the Reapers are really up to date, etc. So we have that's the good news. The tanker is moving forward as well. So we are entering in this new era. But nevertheless, we have to look in the deeper future. We have to look to I would say, the 6th generation fighter within the future combat air system. And we have to do that together with Europe, and we have to keep the interoperability with the US, which is still a great challenge. And I saw that in NATO, and now it's even more obvious than ever. So big priorities, first and foremost, deterrence. There is a great commitment from Mr. Macron on the upgrading of our deterrence. 2 components, it was very clear, keeping the 2 components, the air and the submarines, and moving forward with that. And next, having a look on I would say, the future combat air system, including the drones, obviously. Would it be mail, UCAV, this sort of things, but trying to do that together. So, for instance, the European project on drone is absolutely crucial in the way forward for better cooperation in Europe. And from that, we will build trust and confidence, and we will be able to move even forward in case the nations decide to collaborate on a new fighter. It's not for now, but we have to look forward to that. And this is true in every single domain. So we are looking for investment in surveillance, and I'm thinking about proposing some European type of a surveillance system, which could gather all the European countries to control and to survey the borders and the sea, the common, I would say, the global commons, as we call them, so the Europe could get more strategic autonomy. So there are plenty of projects which make sense, and taking the best of innovation. And this is really absolutely crucial that we understand now that we have not only to invest in the future capabilities, but we have as well perhaps to launch a new mindset, new innovation initiatives. I think it's crucial. We have plenty of expertise, we have plenty of talents, we have these new technologies that we can introduce, we can speed up the development of capabilities, we can build on artificial intelligence, we can build networks which are more clever and more resilient than ever. So it's really the time to reinvent ourselves as well.
And there's the A400M just behind you. A great salute as it's going by. And I also wanted to tell our audience that General Paloméros was one of the fathers of certainly the Reaper Force in the French Air Force, where you worked with your American colleagues to build that relationship and have the U.S. Air Force pull airplanes from its line to be able to speed them to France for immediate use. I want to take you've always been very passionate about collaborative programs, but France also has been very proud of its combat aircraft capability. Very few countries can claim a Dassault, for example, that has that kind of spread. Years ago I was talking to a Lockheed friend of mine who would spend a lot of time in the black world, and I asked him, what is one of the companies that you most admire that makes airplanes? And he said Dassault, because they're very, very good engineers and build extremely good airplanes. And that's not a slight. There are a lot of guys who do that. But France has repeatedly flirted with being part of a pan-European combat aircraft project, but also has wanted to defend its own interests. As now there is more talk about a pan-European combat aircraft program, the Eurofighter is going to need a successor, the Rafale is going to need a successor. It's not abundantly clear at this point whether or not it would be manned or unmanned. But as you look at it, what are the reasons to build that collaboratively? Why is it important to build it collaboratively? Because if you listen to many people here, whether they're Italian or British or others, will say it really is time for everybody to come together at this point to build a collaborative program.
Well, first and foremost, we are looking for a full system now. This is a new way of looking at the global capability, and we are speaking about the future combat air system or something like that. We can put that in different way, but this is true in the UK, this is true in France, this is true in Germany and in many countries, and in NATO we have pushed that, in the EU as well. So everybody understands that we cannot only look to one single equipment, single piece of the inventory. We have to look at that very holistically, so comprehensively. So taking into account every single platform and what it brings and how we can make them collaborating in kind of combat cloud approach. So a new generation fighter should fit into this global system. First and foremost, we need to capitalize on what we have. The Rafale is there for a long time, with a new generation, the new deterrent capability, so that will move the Rafale forward even more. There will be limits somewhere down the line, but so far it's a long-term question. And the same would apply more or less for the Eurofighter. We know that there is the Tornado question as well in Germany, okay, and we need to discuss that with the Germans, how far they can go with the Tornado and how they see the future. The first and foremost is to come together. Would it be in bilateral, within NATO, within the EU? It doesn't matter really, that to build this future architecture. And then we will see what we have to do first. And I will put the drone, the mail surveillance system as a key element, because so far Europe has no autonomy in that. We have really capitalized very, very well on the Reaper. That's fine. And that was exactly what we could do the best. But now we have to think in terms of strategic autonomy. And Europe has absolutely all the competencies and the ability to build a new generation of drones to fulfill the strategic reconnaissance, surveillance, because we need that dramatically to complement the NATO AGS, to complement all the different ways, because against the terrorism we need more and more information. We need to be more relevant, more accurate, more precise in real time. So this is the first pillar, the first step, the first brick in the wall, if I may say so. And then, on the other hand, we have the high-end capabilities, such as the UCAV, to be able to penetrate strong air defense. And we see that now we have in face of us a real threat. So that is very important to consider. What will be the threat of the future? And I will strongly recommend that we have a close look on our prospective threats before deciding any kind of making any kind of decision on precising a specific program.
And you're talking about the A2AD, the anti-access area denial threat that the Russians are posing.
A2AD and many other threats that could apply to the different capabilities that we have today in the air, at sea, on the ground. So we have to be really, because our adversaries are taking the full benefit of technologies. It's not so difficult now to develop systems which can really impede us and in our access to spaces. We call that A2AD, or it doesn't matter really. The matter of the fact is that we will face a very demanding environment. So this is only when we come together and are able to assess the environment according to this kind of threats that we could decide what kind of tools we need. And certainly down the road, a new combat fighter, but which could be quite different from what we have today. But I would say we are not ready yet. But we have to launch that now. We have to put the people together, as we have done in the past for F-1M, for instance. Nobody really felt that we will have one day a single transport aircraft like that, and it came. So it will take time. There is a goodwill, and we have to take into account the expertise, the competency, the industry, for sure, and we have to build that with them, not against them. And we have to make clear that, in my perspective, it will be very tough for one single country in Europe to build this kind of old system. There is a place for everybody in that overall future combat capability. And we have to capitalize on the expertise, on the lessons that we have learned from operations, on our ability to foresee in a certain way the evolution of the threat, and according to that we will build this system.
One of the challenges, though, there's every reason in the world for European countries to be collaborative. Even the United States have launched collaborative programs with our allies. And you could look at the F-35 as a big success given how many different countries are part of that program. A dozen countries are going to be getting the aircraft. I think people forget that 200 of those airplanes have already been delivered, which is a rather enormous, 3,000 is the goal, and an expectation that might be even higher than that. NATO has always had limited luck driving forward some collaborative programs. We talked to Camille Grand. Camille was great in terms of the focus on what at least his office can do in defense investment for what are seen as common. BMD, for example, AWACS recapitalization. But AGS was a very, very difficult road. The EU, Jorge Domecq works very, very hard to try to do pooling and sharing, but there are limitations because governments, when it comes to defense, are sovereign. Do you have a proposal? Is this, it looks like governments are going to be spending more money. It's going to be a lot more money. What are ideas that you have? What are different approaches that have to be used to better spend that money so that there isn't the unnecessary duplication that's characterized? Because you could argue that this time around, each one of the governments have the same social pressures. Each one of them are dealing with immigration challenges and absorption of populations, domestic internal terrorism costs, which have been very high on France. I mean, it's really been reassuring to see all of these troops and gendarmes and, Police Nationale all over the place. But it's also very expensive to have that kind of presence. Is there a different model? Does there need to be a different mentality, ultimately, in this cycle so that we get the most out of it, as opposed to spend a lot of money and maybe not get as much as we need out of it?
What I learned in NATO working with the 28 nations is that the more you look forward in the deep future, the better it is. And you know very well, and we discussed that when I was still in Norfolk, that we launched those kind of strategic foresight analysis, the future framework for alliance operation. We can capitalize on that because it has been built by 28 nations together with the commanders of NATO and in very much coordination with the EU. So it's very compatible. I think every single country has not to reinvent in a certain way the wheel, because we can take that as a vision on the future. Every single country can adjust. So if we look at that with this strategic perspective, we give ourselves a big chance to converge. If we start with the project, we reverse the engine and it doesn't work. You try to build a project, but it doesn't fit within a global strategy. So I will recommend strongly that we stick to what we have agreed within the alliance, within EU, very much compatible, and we look to level of ambition, the future, the threats that we will face, and the kind of geostrategic perspectives together. If we agree on that, that's fine. That will be easier. If we don't agree on that, then we have a real problem. Just to focus on the EU for a few seconds, I think if we want the EU to be successful in defending and securing itself, we must look at it from three perspectives: the political side, the economic and social, and the defense and security. Only if we have an holistic view on the EU future, then we can say this is what we need to secure and to defend ourselves. And then we can start looking into the development of common capabilities, mutualizing, and the choices that we have to make. It's kind of jigsaw puzzle, so we can take different perspectives. For instance, we have today the European Air Transport Command. We are able to share, to pool. There are other models as well. We have the French-German brigade. We have so many different models, and we can accommodate. We must be flexible enough. There is not a single best way to do that. It depends on many things: the history, the tradition, the culture, the capabilities. But only if we get this long-term perspective, we can start building now on the short term and try to capitalize on what we have and to see what are the convergence. Because our opponent, in a certain way, is the time, the agenda, the tyranny of agenda. So we have to get rid of the tyranny of agenda and to say the agenda by itself, it's not a problem. If we get division, we will fix the problem. But if we start with the agenda, the short-term project, and saying we want to do that by ourselves, we will never converge.
I also should say that French military is also on the streets and supporting it, and guys from all over France are pulling deployments in this region and other regions across the country. Another very important question is how President Trump has been very passionate about pressuring European countries to spend more money, particularly the NATO alliance. That was on display at the Article 5 Memorial commemoration in Brussels recently during the summit. At the same time, the president has been equally passionate about discussing America first and buy American. There are those who fear that rhetoric is going to cause rifts in the alliance, that the alliance is actually a political alliance. It has a powerful military component. What's your sense? Is that potentially dangerous from your standpoint?
Starting from the beginning, we have to pay a tribute to this brave man who came in France 100 years ago, and including this famous Lafayette Escadrille, the American Escadrille. And remember what our common history is about: fighting against the devil, fighting against tyranny, fighting against dictatorship. So this is the first and foremost question. What is unifying us today? And every single leader, and I have no lessons to give to anybody, but this is the crucial question in NATO, in the EU, and in the transatlantic bond. And we must struggle, we must fight, and I discussed that with many of our American colleagues. I'm still involved very much in Franco-American relationship. We have to fight to keep that as strong as possible. Even if there are divergences of opinion, of vision, it doesn't matter as long as we share the same perspective in terms of democracy, of values, of common interest as well. And this is what is the key. So it is a very high-level political question, but if we agree on that and say the future, we will build the future together, we will be greater together, as we have done in the alliance for 70 years, we will be okay. So this is the great question which is asked, and I'm very pleased of the position which was taken by our president, by Mr. Macron, saying I'm a keen supporter of the alliance. Not everybody in France was on this opinion. If you see other candidates, some of them say we must get rid of, France must leave again the integrated military structure. No way. So now we are fully committed. France is a key member of NATO and will do its best not only to fulfill its task, but to as well lead the European pact in NATO and saying, now this is true that Europe must take its full responsibility. We understood that, but it takes time. You remember in the Wales Summit, we made it possible that the 28 head of states decided to invest this 2%. That came from us. That came from the NATO command transformation. So now we have a clear goal. So perhaps it's not so helpful to overstate, and I'm taking a position there, because I think the European countries have understood. They have to organize themselves. They know that the 2% is a kind of mantra. It's not only the 2%, it's the quality, it's the 20% investment in budget, which is important as well, and not only fixing. But there is a will. Now, I fully understand that the US president push, and push. But if the message is not clear to the European allies, then I think others will understand as well what it means. The key asset for NATO is solidarity. This is what makes us stronger. And it has been so since we built NATO. 12 members, etc., and we built that, and now we have 29 members. Montenegro joining NATO. So one for all for one must remain the foundation of NATO, with absolutely no doubt, not depending on what could happen there and there. I think France is fully committed, and I think from what I understand, many US leaders are committed as well. The new Secretary of Defense that we know very well, General Mattis, former commander of transformation NATO, is knowing the allies much better than anybody else. So I'm confident in the future.
Do you think, though, that from a rhetoric standpoint, or we've heard it during Brexit as well, that came up of British suspicions of its longtime friends, some very harsh words said about French and Germans and others in that campaign. Are you concerned that rhetoric like that will undermine the political cohesion of the alliance ultimately, if populations begin to not trust each other, and then that gets reflected by leadership that's trying to capitalize on that mistrust to advance perhaps their own agendas?
Well, everything which can divide us is really to be avoided as much as we can. So rhetoric is one. We must judge the leaders upon their real commitment. So far, the US are still committed in Europe and everywhere else. We got the support of the US in Africa to fulfill this huge task of stabilizing the Sahel, and France cannot do that alone, etc., etc. So we will fight terrorism if we fight together. We know that. And this is a large coalition that we need to build and to carry on the future. And as we are speaking, the coalition is retaking in a certain way Iraq, it's moving in Syria, but we have to think on the future, and I'm sure that General Mattis and others are thinking of the future. What will happen in Iraq? What will be the need of Iraq tomorrow? And only a coalition, whether it be NATO, European countries, can achieve something to support the rebuilding in a certain way of Iraq. I have no solution so far, but that must be discussed. And only if we trust each other, we can move forward. And even the US, with its immense power, cannot do everything alone. The US has such a task to fulfill in the world that it needs allies and not only partners. I made a great difference between partners and allies. The allies are committed together to fight together for their freedom. Partners can change depending on the time and the political tempo. The alliance is something very different. This is true for the Union as well. That means something is uniting us so strongly that nothing can divide us. And this is how I see the future.
One last question. You talked repeatedly about democracy and its role in the difference between this alliance and other military organizations, let's put it that way. And over time, you've also talked about the not just pure military power, but also all of the other arms of power and how they have to come together. You spent more than 40 years wearing the French uniform as a soldier, as an airman, I should say. How are you afraid that that message will be lost, that there are some who look at more as power? What's the balance from your standpoint between power, hard power, but also soft power?
I don't see the world like that. I mean, I think today the comprehensive approach is permanently balancing the way we deal with the problem in a certain way, and we must be much more flexible. So I see more integration between the different levels of power. This is why getting the European Union up to the security and defense challenge is so important, because the European Union has every single tool in its inventory to take care of securing the borders, protecting against terrorism, against immigration. This is really the task. Mr. Macron used to say that we need a Europe which is able to protect the people. And I like that, because this is exactly what the Europeans are expecting. Protecting, which means protecting in terms of security, but protecting as well in a certain way their job, protecting their future, protecting their education, their tradition, their values. This is what it means. So if we find that way forward, we will be able to use at the best the tools. But on the other hand, some people must understand that without the stick, they will not achieve anything, because at a certain stage you need the stick, whether to prevent, to deter, or to act. Exactly what we try to do in NATO, to show our strengths and to be able not to use it at a certain stage.
Sir, thanks very much. General Jean-Paul Paloméros, retired French Air Force general, former chief of the French Air Force, former Supreme Allied Commander Transformation. Sir, thanks so much.
Thank you.